The Index system by Prusa and Bondtech was unveiled at Formnext 2025, sold out within minutes, and is still not available in the shop today. So for a lot of people, the question isn't whether to buy it, but whether it's worth waiting for. Tool changes across 8 tool heads in just 12 seconds, perfect nozzle alignment on every print, no prime tower, and only 13 milligrams of waste per tool change. I installed the Founders Edition I ordered at Formnext into my Core 1 to find out for you whether all of that is just marketing. And my first print unfortunately looked exactly like this. But first things first, everything starts with the conversion, and that one's a piece of work. The Index doesn't come as a finished printer, but as a conversion kit, which means before you can print anything, you first need a Core 1, which you then partially take apart. And let me tell you this much up front, this upgrade costs you more than just the purchase price. Strictly speaking, my Founders Edition, which I ordered at Formnext, isn't a Prusa product, but a Bondtech one. Overall though, the system is of course a joint development. Bondtech builds the smart toolhead and the 8 nozzle tools. Prusa contributes all the integration parts, the docks, the wiring, the sensors, firmware and slicer support. The Core 1's extruder is the first thing to go. Then the heat bed gets raised by a few millimeters and receives the electronics for automatic nozzle offset calibration. Next comes the Index Smart Toolhead, the filament holders and sensors, and finally the docks for the tools. In total that means running a lot of cables and driving in a lot of screws, some of them in genuinely hard to reach places. And yes, the conversion kit costs you a bit of build volume. 2 millimeters in X and 15 in Y direction. That's less than some people feared, but the Core 1's already tight build volume shrinks a little bit further. If you have ever assembled a Prusa printer, you know their manuals are simply excellent, and the Index is no different. All 286 steps are cleanly documented. The pictures are unambiguous and I never once had to guess. Still, the whole conversion took me a good 10 hours with the camera running. Without it, you will probably end at 6 to 8. And you need to be clear about this from the start if you're considering an Index system. This time is part of the price. Fine as a hobby, but a business customer really has to factor these hours in. And the price for the upgrade isn't small. $749 for 4 tools and $999 for 8. On top of that comes the Core 1 itself, starting at $999. I really hope that Prusa eventually offers a pre-assembled version for a moderate surcharge, like they did back with the MMU. That would really be worth it. Because if I'm honest, the conversion wasn't much fun. Sure, you get to know your machine inside out. I know now where every single component sits, but the many repetitive steps, especially on the spool holders and the tools, are tedious. Individual screws cost me minutes because the small torque screws go into the printed holes really hard. An electric screwdriver like my Bondtech is worth its weight in gold here. Even so, some screws end up sitting slightly crooked and a few spots on the housing simply stay open after the conversion. Sure, you can print yourself some covers, but pretty is something else. And on a $2,000 printer, that impression just doesn't match the price. I do like the sustainability angle. My Core 1 had been sitting around mostly unused because other printers were simply more interesting. And now it gets a new life. But price versus quality versus assembly experience, that's out of balance. And I have real doubts about how contemporary this still is. To be fair, the manual and the setup wizard on the printer are as flawless as ever, even if it took me a few attempts to get the load cell calibrated. And after all that effort, I was all the more excited for the first print. But first, loading Filament. And right there, I got to know both sides of the Index. The good ones and the annoying ones. Let's start with the annoying ones. The Core 1 has no stock solution for keeping filament dry. And that doesn't change with the Index, except that now there are 8 spools hanging openly on the printer. Prusa now offers the USS dry box, but I couldn't test it. It's permanently sold out, and at $35 a piece, it's not exactly cheap either. For all 8 spools, that would be around another $280 on top. Sure, you can hook up any off-the-shelf filament dryer, but a clean out-of-the-box solution it is not. And whatever you use, you have to push every filament to the printhead by hand. Not quite as annoying as on the XL with its endlessly long tubes, but convenient is something else. A SnapMaker U1 or an AMS just does this automatically. Loading 8 filaments this way takes me a good 5 minutes in the end. What immediately won me over though is how the nozzle heats up for loading. Thanks to the induction coil, it hits 250 degrees in a few seconds. My core one with the extruder needed over 2 minutes for that. Induction heating is simply a blessing for 3D printing, and I hope other manufacturers follow suit. But the fast heating is more than just convenience. It's Bondtech's answer to the Index biggest design disadvantage. Because unlike on the U1 or the Prusa XL, no nozzle here can preheat in the dock. Every part nozzle cools down, and depending on the pass, it's completely cold when the head picks it up. Whether the induction really compensates for that is something no spec sheet can tell us, so let's finally start the first print test. This multicolor Gengar is printed with 4 colors as full spectrum, meaning small layer heights and several hundred tool changes per print. For comparison, I first sliced and printed the model for the Snapmaker U1. At 0.2mm layer height, it takes just under 4 hours in the real world. For the Index, Prusa Slicer offers us a layer height of 0.1mm, slightly finer than on the Snapmaker U1. That pushes the layer count up to 618 instead of 516 layers, yet the Index print time is only a good half an hour longer. An even finer print at 0.08mm would already take over 6 hours on the U1, according to its slicer. On prints like these, all those tool changes really start to add up. Take the U1, a tool change here, measured from leaving the print until the print head is back in it, takes up to 20 seconds in reality, even though its heads are already preheated in the dock before the swap. The reason is priming. The printer first has to rebuild pressure and constant flow in the nozzle, and it does that on the so-called prime tower. And that's exactly what the Index skips entirely. It grabs the nozzle, heats it up fast thanks to the induction, and instead of perching into a tower, it perches against a V-shaped silicon block. And that block essentially simulates a print layer, so the nozzle can head back into the print almost without a detour. All in all, the real tool change time on the Index sits at just around 12 to 16 seconds despite the cold nozzles, and depending on how far the nozzle had cooled down. So the Index swaps faster than the U1 despite the preheating time. And dropping the tower pays off twice because it saves not just time but also waste. Per change, the Index leaves behind only a tiny crumb. Prusa quotes 0.013 gram per crumb. I weighted 10 of them and I got 0.17 grams. I will call that measurement tolerance. Prusa and Bondtech kept their word here. Over the entire Gengar print, that adds up to 9.6 grams of waste in total. Tower and perch on the U1 weighed 25.4 grams by comparison, more than 2.5 times as much. And even if you make the tower smaller, it will never get close to the Index. And the tool change itself, by the way, is very reliable too. In my testing, it worked close to 3,000 times without a single problem. So everything's great. The Index is the best multi-material system on the market now, and the video is over. Almost, because now we need to talk about print quality. And maybe you remember the beginning, this exact print. My first print looked, and I can't put it in any other way, catastrophic. Massive stringing, blobs everywhere, and the support material wouldn't come off cleanly. At first I suspected wet filament, but when I repeated the same print on the Snapmaker and saw noticeably fewer strings there, I could pretty much rule out moisture. And I basically never see problems like this with PLA anyway. What I then noticed, after the print there were filament crumbs lying all over the printer. And when I spotted them on the drip guard in the tool dock too, it all clicked. They apparently form during the purge against the V-shaped silicone block. When the nozzle leaves the block, filament can stick to it and gets dragged into the print. And because there's no prime tower to catch it, that residual lands directly in the print as a blob. So does the Index biggest advantage turn out to be its very own problem? Well, you can't dismiss that entirely. I was able to improve the print quality by increasing the distance between the nozzle and the silicone block. That height can actually be fine-tuned by hand. But even after the correction, I still see blobs and strings here and there, far from how it should look. So I run a double cross check. First, a print in just one color on the Index with no tool changes at all. And there I have nothing to complain about quality-wise. Clearly better than the color mix print. So the base quality is fine. The The problem really only appears with the tool changes. So as a second check, I enabled the prime tower in the slicer, and sure enough, a clearly better result. Not perfect, a bit of stringing remains, but close to the snapmaker's level. And that reveals something else along the way. The colors sit exactly on top of each other, the automatic nozzle alignment, which the index remeasures before every print with an eddy current sensor, apparently works flawlessly. My feeling is that it's not the hardware as such, not the index itself at its core. What's missing is simply some fine-tuning on exactly the feature Prusa advertises the loudest. What I keep asking myself is, why do I have to set this height by hand at all? Other printers have wipers that just work. To me, this part doesn't feel fully finished. And speaking of fully finished, the software is a big topic on the index too, for better and for worse. Let's start with the good part. Prusa recently integrated its own take on full spectrum printing into Prusa Slicer 2.9.6. called Color Mix here. And that makes exactly this possible. Printing this Gengar in something close to purple without ever loading purple filament, mixed from cyan and magenta. The trick is simple. Thin layers of different colors are printed alternately, and to the eye, they blend into one color. All you have to do is load a colored model, mix your target colors using so-called virtual extruders, and then manually replace the colors in the model with those virtual extruders. Or you make it easier on yourself and use my own tool, Paint Port. You just drag in a FreeMF file, tell it which colors are available on your printer, and the tool automatically calculates the optimal mix. You see the result in a preview and simply download a fully configured file for Prusa Slicer that you only need to open and print. And the index system is simply made for this printing technique. It became popular with the Snapmaker U1, but with 4 heads, that one is honestly too limited. It can only mix cyan, magenta, yellow and 1/4 color, so you have to choose white for light or black for darker tones. The Core 1 prints with 5 colors, or even with 8, adding red, green and blue. And that covers a much wider range of colors. And this is exactly where nobody currently comes close to the index. With up to 8 loaded base colors, you mix a palette a 4-head system can only dream of. My PaintPort tool is completely free, by the way. You will find the link in the description. But as much as I like this color mix approach in Prusa Slicer combined with the index, I have just as much criticism to voice elsewhere. And sure, everything in the software can still evolve. I don't want to pass a final verdict here, I just want to show you the current state so you can decide to yourself whether it makes sense to wait for an index system. Because at launch there are only print profiles for PLA and PETG, and only in selected layer heights. Especially for color mix printing, I'm missing the finer layers. And there are also no ready-made profiles for printing PETG support under PLA, and no for water-soluble support material. Of course you can configure all of that yourself in the slicer, but tested profiles are simply part of a polished user experience. And now you could say, it's the Founder Edition. I should expect that not everything runs perfectly at the start. Sure, but the index system has been running at Formnext since last November, and the Founders Edition shipment was even delayed further due to hardware changes. So there was plenty of time to polish the software. Others not only ship faster, they ship with profiles that work. And then there's a point that has bothered me for a very long time. Back in my MMU-free video, I already criticized that the printer knows which material sits on which slot, but not which color. The firmware simply has no management for it. Which means in Prusa Slicer you have to remember to set up the colors in exactly the right order or assign them by hand before every print. And that makes it practically impossible to start a print remotely. Via Prusa Connect, the assignment can't be corrected at print start. A simple color selection when loading would be exactly the solution. The problem has existed at least since the MMU3, and every other manufacturer handles this matching automatically. I have no explanation for it. And one more point that genuinely bothers me. Even though every nozzle is a passive tool, no electronics, and therefore quick and cheap to manufacture, you currently can't buy replacement nozzles at all. Neither at Bondtech nor at Prusa. There was a page listed at one point quoting a price of $45 per nozzle, and that's pretty expensive for a single nozzle once you compare. On the Snapmaker, 4 nozzles together cost $49. So I'm strongly hoping for third parties to manufacture compatible complete nozzles. And that should get some movement into the pricing. Bottom line. For a system that was delayed for months and whose regular kits shipped to normal Prusa customers in just a few weeks, this is a pretty bumpy start, which brings us back to the question from the beginning. Is it worth waiting for the index system to become available, or are you better off going with a different printer? The answer, in my view, depends on a few factors. Because if you already own a Core 1 and don't have to watch every dollar, the index system is of course a really good upgrade. If you print with lots of colors, it's in my view even the best solution on the market. No established manufacturer offers this many nozzles at once in such a small footprint. If you're more into engineering filaments though, things get thinner. Contrary to the hopes from the development phase, the nozzle is currently software capped at 290 degrees. And that already rules out a whole range of filaments. Although, to be fair, the regular small Core 1 isn't the perfect platform for those anyway. It has no active chamber heating, which makes some specialty filaments rather difficult to print. For that, the upcoming Core 1L with Index would be a more interesting option. It can even run up to 10 nozzles, but its Index kit doesn't seem to arrive before the end of the year. All in all, the price for the complete system is pretty steep. Maybe the comparison isn't entirely fair. A company in Europe has a different cost structure, and looking at the overall market, that inevitably makes the index system more of a niche product. And that's exactly why, in my view, a device like this has to shine with features nobody else has. And one more thing that matters to me almost more than any number. It's incredibly important that manufacturers like Prusa exist as a counterweight to those who lock down their systems or drop them after a short time, producing piles of e-waste. The index system stands for the opposite: openness, long-term support, and the upgradability of existing machines. So who is it worth it for? If you already own a Core 1, if you're a Prusa supporter and want to back the values behind it, if you can live with the fact that the product still needs to mature, and if you don't have to watch the money too closely, then this is an unreserved recommendation from my side. Especially since you can even convert it later once it becomes available for the Core 1L. If on the other hand, you're new to the market and looking for a multi-material printer, you have to honestly ask yourself whether you really need that many nozzles. If yes, few roads lead past Prusa. If you can live with fewer colors, other machines are of course significantly cheaper and also have very active communities. Then you simply have to decide for yourself whether you can or you want to spend the money. And one thing I want to underline, the way the index system is designed at its core, I consider it rock solid and outstandingly done, which has already led to other manufacturers copying it. How long their support will last and whether it's as sustainable as Prusa's is questionable in my view. But it shows the concept is very good, and I have no doubt it will keep getting better over time. So a clear recommendation. Still, quite a few things remain open for me. So let me ask you directly, what's your impression after this first hands-on? And above all, which points should I include in my full review? Because some things haven't been answered yet. How well does the index system handle flexible filaments like TPU, for example? And how does it perform with other materials in general, ABS, ASA or polycarbonate? Drop your points in the comments, and so you don't miss the review, leave a sub or sign up for my newsletter. Thanks for watching, thanks for your subscription and for supporting my channel. And now go ahead and check out this video right here.